Okay, so this is part 3 of what is postmodernism and what's going on beyond postmodernism. Well, since we're still in the postmodernist age, I thought it was accurate to call this video series Postmodernism, because this is sort of where we are right now. It's good to understand it, and it's also good to understand at the end of a paradigm, it usually reaches, I guess you could say, it's a paradigm evolves to a point where it's extremely sophisticated. It reaches the peak of its development, and when it has that, it usually has transitory pieces that kind of break off and then lead to the next scientific revolution. So, okay, so that in mind, I would like to sort of explore some of the thinkers at the end of the 20th century who were postmodern, but more postmodern, who were beginning to say, like, all right, we understand postmodernism, but here are some serious problems and holes and inconsistencies with it, because scientifically speaking, it's not adding up. And one of these thinkers, I guess you could say, he was really able to articulate a decentralized reality, but one that was not necessarily lacking a bigger picture. Because, and this guy is Deleuze. If you've read Deleuze, I've mentioned him before. Here's Deleuze. This is a good book, very poetic. If you're into poetic philosophy, this would be a book for you. Another book I recommend is A Thousand Plateaus. And what we have here is basically, instead of seeing human development as simply levels or stages or hierarchies, Deleuze was like, all right, this is way more decentralized. It's too complex to kind of map out so simplistically. Instead, we have rivers and streams and flows and all these different variables and chemicals that all come together, and then them coming together creates new variables and new just new characteristics. And he saw societies and people and history like this. History wasn't so, causal. It was, history wasn't causal. I think that's a good way to put it. History and society isn't causal. It's not so simplistic like that. A equals B, that sort of thing. Instead, it was just a simple, a series of rivers and streams interacting, of different characteristics flowing together. He saw everything sort of like a very complex streaming of various elements, I guess you could say. And this, you might say, is probably one of the more developed and healthier forms of postmodernism, because postmodernism, it was less extreme. He wasn't saying there is no absolute meaning, but he was saying everything's very complex, and we can't box it in to ideologies. Or as Delanda says, Delanda is a avid reader and proclaimer of Deleuze, I guess you could say. He's another sociologist. Delanda says, gone is the age where we can talk of frameworks. Everything has a framework, the framework of Newtonian physics and the framework of postmodernism even. It's more complex than that. Things are heterogeneous. Because within these time periods, for instance, in Newtonian physics, I'm sure there are people who are thinking more relativistically. Maybe not scientifically, but maybe philosophically or culturally. They kind of understood that things were less centralized, and people acted decentralized too, to some degree. So it's not that these things didn't exist already, and that there are other possibilities that history could have taken, and ideologies could have taken. So again, that is why they're heterogeneous and mere just assemblies of like thoughts like thought. In other words, groups of people who kind of see the same thing come together. This is very basic sociology, but there are a lot of deviances, and for the most part, a lot of the social sciences don't cover what these deviances are, or the importance of understanding how complex it really is. So that is postmodern. But instead of saying, look, that's it, we can only study the relative, he says, no, we can study the relative and see how it builds up to the bigger picture. And and that's what I guess you could say that's what he started to do. In his book, A Thousand Plateaus, basically what he was trying to get at was, look, we have in society a way to understand how we keep progressing, but not in the way that modernism saw us as progressing. Instead, we have sort of a build-up, and this is a little bit of a paraphrase because he wasn't saying all this. He was focusing more on the streaming, flowing nature of reality, but it ties into evolution, and again, it ties into what Kuhn said, or Kuhn, I don't know how to pronounce it, about the structure of scientific revolutions. There's a build-up period. As Kurzweil says, evolution is not linear, it's non-linear, as DeLanda agrees in Deleuze. But it's exponential, which means it does have direction, but just not in the linear way. It has non-linear direction. And if that sounds like a paradox, let me explain a little bit more. This is what it comes down to. So these systems of rivers and streams, right? But for some reason, every paradigm, every plateau, whether it be, Newtonian physics paradigm plateau, has a building up period of intensity where it begins to grow and grow and grow, and it really shines, and it has a lot of information and a lot of shared, and a lot of new knowledge is founded. But it reaches a critical mass where it can no longer remain the way it was. It's learned too much. It's discovered something new. So there's a build-up, right? And for the most part, the main paradigm remains the same. It remains, in postmodernism, for instance, everything is pretty much relative, and that's remained the same even till today. There is little in the way of integral bigger picture theorists. There are a few. There are a handful. I think Parsons was one. Ken Wilber is one. DeLanda is one. Castells is another. These are just a few names. Just to name a few. But for the majority of people, they tend to focus on the relativistic aspect. And this is because in any paradigm or plateau, there's a build-up period where it slowly doubles up on itself and slowly starts to build up until it reaches a critical point and explodes, and there's a paradigm shift. And this is how we can see direction in society and progression and evolution without losing the complexity. We can see general tendencies without losing the relativistic aspects. And this is the amazing part, because for one of the first times, we can finally begin to see a bigger picture. And what this bigger picture implies is that, and it's almost like it's a growing of intensity. How we measure that degree of such an intensity and see the overall structures of development is now possible. So this is the vertical dimension, which DeLanda and Deleuze don't speak of as much because, remember, they're very steeped in postmodernism, but they're sort of taking it and evolving it. Other thinkers begin to explore these series of plateaus in a more structured way. You might argue Wilber is an early guy who did this. Gene Gebser is another early guy who did this. Claire Graves with spiral dynamics. You have theories that sort of map out the stages of human development across all history and all times that aren't simplistic because they account for these buildups. But in order for us to reach a stage where we take for granted the complexity and also understand the bigger picture, this is going to take a while. For now, we're sort of in this transitory period where we're beginning to understand that there is a bigger picture, and we're continuing to see more and more of it, and we don't have any final paradigm going on, but we do have a growing perspective, and that is our new paradigm, one where we start to see structures that connect the dots. And okay, so that's it for this video. That's where we're going.